Today on Locked On Canadiens, let's start talking about our Owen Beck feelings. MVP, MVP, MVP.
You're Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi there, everyone, and welcome to episode 1083 of Locked On Canadiens. As you know, we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit fanduel.com/lockedon to get started. My name is Laura Saba, also known as The Active Stick, and I'm joined, as always, by Scott Matlow, Habs, Eyes on the Prize. And Scott, we should probably lead off with the news, which, thank you, there is news, thanks to the Montreal Canadiens. How are you doing after what I hope was a very fun weekend?
Well, I survived Boston, which is a bonus in and of itself. Always good to be back, but good Lord, we are hitting that early stage of like spring, summer where it goes from like being 60 and cool in the morning to being 80 and disgusting and humid in the span of like 2 hours, of which I am learning that, I am still not made for warm climates, unfortunately. So, but outside of that, can't really complain, honestly.
Neither am I. Someone else who cannot complain is Jared Davidson. Scott, I do believe you and I were both a little bit surprised that this was the player that was, I guess, one of the first pieces of homework that the Canadiens got out of the way. Having watched him, do you think that he earned that contract, or would you have waited, is the question?
It's a hard question. And I'm not surprised that he was one of the first pieces done because the June 1st deadline has come and passed, and that included players like Petteri Nurmi, Cedric Guindon, and also on here, Jared Davidson. And I'm surprised they didn't sign Cedric Guindon. I'm not too surprised about Petteri Nurmi. But I look at Davidson and his time in the WHL where, he was an overager, but he grew year after year. From the COVID year, 19 points in 23 games, to 89 points in 64 games, to 82 points in 60 games. Good playoff performances for the Seattle Thunderbirds in those time as well. And then with the Rocket this year, he kind of didn't stand out immediately at first, and then has grown into a pretty solid depth piece. 11 goals in 38 games, 16 points on the season. Unfortunately, suffered a season-ending injury, had to have surgery done on that, and missed most of the year here. But I think they saw a guy who competed with a high motor, with energy, and could chip in some of that depth scoring at the professional level as a player who is not, it says 6 feet tall, but when I see Jared Davidson on the ice, I don't fully believe that, to be quite honest. But he's definitely a good piece for the Rocket to add into next season. I'm interested to see where he fits into that lineup, but I think getting someone back who can fill a middle six role there, chip in some goals and some tenacity is always welcomed on this Rocket team, and someone who's familiar with now returning coach Jean-Francois Houle as well.
Well, that was the thing, because I feel like Jared Davidson, even after he got drafted, when he was playing, there wasn't a whole lot of noise. It was actually our listeners that were telling us about him, right? And there always seemed to be promise and potential, but it was very down, you came crashing back down to earth, right? He wasn't necessarily showing anything, but as you pointed out, he must have impressed them enough in his season stint, right? He must have, that's why they did this. That's why they signed him. And that's why, as opposed to other players, they didn't just, let the deadline pass. They didn't just we'll figure it out if necessary, if another team doesn't want him, et cetera, et cetera. In the meantime, sorry, did you have any final points? Because I was going to flip to a different player.
I did, just because I'm kind of looking at Cedric Guindon, because I think that's the one most people are going to look at.
And wonder why.
And looking at this team, it's mostly the same team in places last year with the same leading scorers on the team. And Guindon went from, having 69 points, nice, in 68 games and being a -4, which is fine. He was a big power play producer, to having less points and having a much worse plus minus, not developing that side of his game there. And admittedly, I didn't watch a ton of Owen Sound games because why would I? In most cases,
You were
and
coming about.
I go, the growth in production was not there that you would have hoped for. Like we've seen in other players, Jared Davidson maybe at the professional level showed enough, but if you're not seeing it at this OHL level, you're not going to hope and pray that it shows up the next time.
Absolutely. All right. So turning our attention, Scott, you pointed out that fan favorite and also one of our favorites, Sean Monahan, is going to UFA. Are we going to see him in Montreal?
Does
it feel like it's setting itself up for that? Like, that's my question. Because the thing is, he re-signed in Montreal so that he could prove himself. And then he went over to a team that was hoping to make noise in the playoffs, but then didn't. And then thankfully, because it would have made me so sick to have to keep cheering for that team. I just wanted him to be happy. But, he seemed happy in Montreal. He was one of the players where, fans just wanted him back. Like, we got so many mailbag questions about will he come back? Even before he got traded, it was like, do you think they'll re-sign him? They should re-sign him. What are your thoughts?
My thought is that if Ken Hughes brings him back, it's actually the funniest possible thing that could happen, because can he get a third first-round pick for Sean Monahan?
That would be so funny.
And I think it legitimately, if they aren't sold on Owen Beck, which more on him in our next segment, as a potential 3C, 4C next year at the NHL level, if you bring in Sean Monahan to be your third line center there, where he showed to be halfway decent, a pretty good power play guy as well, and then obviously had to step up in the absence of Kirby Dach, it's not the worst thing in the world we've ever seen. I also think that because of his strong season in Montreal, I think he had a halfway decent year after he got traded to the Winnipeg Jets there. And I'm just taking a look at what he did in Winnipeg this season. Yeah, he put up 24 points in 34 games and put up 35 points in 49 games with the Canadiens. Putting up 59 points in a season and 26 goals isn't the worst thing in the world. One of his more successful seasons in a long time here on a struggling team and then what was supposed to be a deep playoff team. LOL, we know that's not true. I think someone out there is going to look at this and go, he's back, good to go. And you're going to see someone they're going to make that mistake that we've seen a lot of teams do, is that he was good, but they don't look at the context of it. For the Canadiens, if he were to come back at, let's say $2 million, fine. I just don't see that being what's offered him. I see someone willing to offer him term and money. Right. There are teams that need centers out there. I look at the Boston Bruins. They desperately need center help, and they're going to have a little bit of money to play around with. You never know. Tampa Bay did Tampa Bay re-sign Steven Stamkos yet or no? I can't remember. Either way.
I don't think so, because I believe up until last week, people were still asking us about him. I'm going to be really, really honest. It was a storyline I wanted to talk about just for the shiggles. But I did not pay attention. But I do not believe he has re-signed yet.
No, he is still a free agent. The big news that Tampa tweeted out about a returning player was Ryan McDonough. But I think that there are teams that are out there, they're going to look at him and go, okay, we can give him 3 years at 3.75, $4 million plus, because they desperately need centers. And then you're getting into dangerous territory. Not that Monahan didn't prove that he could stay healthy last year. He did just that. He was absolutely that for the Canadiens last year.
But that was 1 year out of like an entire career that's been plagued with injury, right? Like, it's not Pascal Leclerc level injuries, but it's like he's definitely an injury prone player. But I think if he were able to stay healthy, like, I still think at his age, that's a pretty steep price to pay, don't you think?
And that's exactly it, is that, I look at his first season with Montreal. He got off to a very good start, got injured, tried to play through it. Stupid, all things considered with that. and then while rehabbing it, had a freak injury. That should give some teams pause, but there are teams that are desperately in need.
Some teams
And
will not pause, Scott. They will not
yeah,
pause.
not my problem, to be quite honest with that. I would think it'd be very funny if he came back and Kent Hughes again traded him and got a third first-round pick for it. I think that the league would then investigate Kent Hughes and Sean Monahan for some sort of
Collusion.
nefarious collusion, but I can see a team like Boston, and I hate to say this, Toronto potentially.
Grubby hands off of Sean Monahan.
There teams that need that kind of depth in their lineup, and he might be willing to go for there because it's his best chance at a Stanley Cup. Who know, like the markets can shift very rapidly, but there might be an up and coming team, a Columbus maybe, who we want a veteran centerman here.
So I'd be okay with him going to Columbus, but we got so carried away having fun with the Sean Monahan part of the segment that we are out of time, and we must turn our attention over to the latest MVP in the Montreal Canadiens system, and that is Owen Beck. We know you wanted to, so you've been clamoring for us to talk about him since he won last night, and we will do just that in just one moment. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. We are talking playoffs. We are talking winner take all. We are talking finals. And FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, has got you covered. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. I mean, look at it. The Oilers, the Florida Panthers. I don't even know yet. I haven't even decided yet who I would want to bet on, but FanDuel has got it on all. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, LOCKEDON, and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Scott, on Sunday night, the Memorial Cup final happened, and Owen Beck was named MVP of the tournament. I can't say I'm surprised. I can't say I'm not excited. I feel like he did all it takes. But there's still some people that aren't super convinced of Owen Beck. What are your thoughts?
One, everyone shut the hell up. I'm to be very blunt I think I've seen it in a few parts of Twitter, and I've seen it, drifting on Habs Twitter, that it's like, hey, look at this great performance. Is this, a trade boosting performance? And my thought is, why are we doing this before he's played more than one single professional game, which he did as an emergency recall? I look at what Owen Beck has done in this season after being traded from Peterborough to Saginaw for the Memorial Cup host there, and it's incredible. A night and day performance, looking a lot more like the guy who was in Mississauga before he was traded, went to Peterborough, had a pretty solid playoff there with 16 points in 22 games, went to Peterborough this year, still put up over a point per game, went to the powerhouse Saginaw Spirit team who were hosting the Memorial Cup, and they loaded up with talent for this, put up 51 points in 32 games, put up 14 points in 17 playoff games, and then put up 5 points in 5 Memorial Cup games, including 2 goals in the actual Memorial Cup final to help Saginaw finally slay their own boogeyman in the London Knights in that final, getting named Memorial Cup MVP for his efforts there. And the first thing is that, well, can we use him to trade up and get something? Like, no. I really want people to stop being like, hey, here was a good performance. We should trade person immediately.
I was on mute. I was about to interrupt you going like, why can't everyone just calm down?
Because, and I love this fan base for its passion and its intensity and its commitment to wanting the Canadiens to be good. That has never been in doubt in my mind. But it's the issue with young players. This is not Sean Monahan. This is not David Savard. This is not veteran players who are what they are, having a good run and then being traded or not being traded. This is what they are. Every time some of these young guys have a huge upswing or have a good run at something, the first thing, and I see it so often, is, can we package this together and get other player now? There are times that, yes, I get that. You have to get to give in the NHL. This is one of those times that I look at that and I go, this team has been screaming for somebody to replace Philip Deneau since the 21 playoffs ended. And he walked. I am not saying Owen Beck is going to be Philip Deneau exactly, but I'm saying he's about the best bet you're going to have in recent years to be that guy for the Canadiens. And I can read, what Hedy Kalakash has said, what Lauren Kelly has said, what other people who have watched a lot of Owen Beck have said. He is that guy. He shows up in big game situations. He's a gamer in every sense of the word. And as I watch this, I see his name popping up. He's in the middle of everything. He had an incredible final against London last night. Scores the opening goal. Absolutely nukes a Leaf prospect on the back check. Scores another goal and is out there in crucial situations. This is a guy next year that I know Ryan Bacher's going to be here, and I know that Hudson's going to be here, and there's going to be eyes on whomever they draft in training camp. But Owen Beck is going to have, I think, that aura about him of that he's going to be that guy that comes in and he surprises. And maybe, they say, hey, we're going to send you down to start the year while we, work on maybe trading somebody else or whatever. I'm so excited to see what he can do. Having watched him play at the Rookie Showcase in person it's been a while since I've seen someone that is so smart with the puck in the forward group for the Montreal Canadiens. He's smart. He always knows where to be. He makes things happen. He makes teammates around him better because he's always in the right position. This is the perfect cap to his junior career. He, won a gold medal with the Canadian World Junior team. Didn't win the Memorial Cup last year. They came up short in Peterborough. Wins it this year in his final season, and it's well deserved. Like, he was truly one of the best players in the OHL this year. And I don't think I'm being hyperbolic when I say that. I know other players had a lot more points and everything, but I look at what Owen Beck did on that Saginaw team, that he was incredible for them.
And that's this is the thing too, is that dominant doesn't always just mean the most points, right? Dominant sometimes just means the way that you play. And I think the big thing with Owen Beck is that if you remove him, who else is playing two-way? What other center do you see playing defensive and offensive? They really need Owen Beck, because otherwise Nick Suzuki is completely chafing under the amount of minutes that he plays and the assignments that he gets. Nick Suzuki, God bless him, you do want someone to be that defensively responsible, especially if he's your number one center. You absolutely want that. But what's happening is a lot of the offense is being sacrificed because of the assignments that he's getting, right? And ideally, you would have Nick Suzuki, and then you would have someone like Owen Beck to eat those defensive situation minutes. Nick Suzuki doesn't just get a rest, his assignment changes, and the way that he gets used changes. And then not only is he bringing out the best in himself and Juraj Slafkovsky, he's also going back to bringing out the best in Cole Caulfield or anyone else you put on that line. I think the problem that I think a lot of people constantly talk about is that line a lot of the time is getting into situations, then people are like, oh, well, Cole Caulfield is failing. No, he's not. They're just ending up getting stuck in situations where if you had an Owen Beck and a complementary line mates on the team, you would have the ability to free up Nick Suzuki. So you would have a free Nick Suzuki line, and then you have a free Kirby Dach line, injuries permitting, So I think that thing where people are like, oh, let's just trade up because he's not going to be the next, I don't know, who's a center that's not like Connor McDavid level, but is still really good. Anyway, one of those guys, right? You don't need that if you can use Owen Beck properly in his own position. And that's another thing too, is that not everybody should be first line center potential. It's okay that Owen Beck's ceiling is not that high, but his floor is still NHL third line center. That's his floor. Why can't we all just have nice things and accept them? That's a luxury to have that. So to me, I get really annoyed because then you watch him show up in these big games and get named tournament MVP. He doesn't cave under the pressure. And I think that's huge. And there's been so many different knocks on his game. It's like one year he's not scoring enough. The other year he's not doing this enough. The other year he's not doing this enough. And like you look at some of the teams he's played on and you're like, well, no wonder. So for me, like we talked about in a previous segment, it's Owen Beck. It's entirely up to him whether he makes the NHL out of training camp. It is 100% Owen Beck's say, I think.
Yeah, and the thing about it is, and like at the end of the day is, I believe that Owen Beck will be an NHL player. Where his ceiling is up to, the next steps that he takes, and with the Canadiens development, staff in place. I think I'm not going to say he's going to supplant Nick Suzuki, but I'm also not going to bet against him showing that there is more to his game than he has already showcased right now. And I'm excited to see him. He's someone that obviously, like we've loved on this podcast, there's so many talented young players joining the professional ranks full time next year after a year where that already happened. It's hard to not be giddy about this. And like I said, capping off your junior career with a Memorial Cup and a tournament MVP is just setting the stage for the next big thing for Owen Beck, honestly.
And I honestly, all I can do is I'll keep having faith and keep getting excited about this player until there's such a time as it is definitively proven that he was just not meant to be a Montreal Canadien. In the meantime, we are going to move on to an argument I still keep seeing, and I want to rant a little bit about that, and that's coming up in just one moment here on Locked On Canadiens. All right. So, Scott, it's still happening. People keep talking about Montreal as a place where players do not want to sign. And I think that it's entirely unfair, particularly since this current management hasn't even gone out and tried to find big name free agents yet. Like they're not there in their rebuild yet. And that argument that players don't want to play in Montreal is so tired. It's so tired. And it's always like a different thing. It's like, oh, one, the taxes are too high. Two, like, there's too much scrutiny. Three, like, everybody has to learn French and go to French school, et cetera, et cetera. So here's one thing, okay? Like the number one thing that I will tell people when they talk about the taxes is that there are ways that tax accountants and lawyers can structure your compensation in order to mitigate some of that tax stuff. Now, whether it's obviously legal because they all do it, whether it's right or not isn't my problem. But if you get the right people surrounding you, the taxes being more than others, like you're never going to be tax free in most cities, right? Like Florida doesn't have tax. I think the Golden Knights, like Vegas, doesn't have tax. Like there's a couple of states that don't have income tax, and then everyone else does, right? So most people are in the same boat, right? Like, so that to me is a moot point because all you have to do is get yourself a good tax lawyer. That's what you need. The next thing is like, oh, there's too much scrutiny in Montreal. There's too much scrutiny in Montreal. No, there isn't. There is the appropriate amount of scrutiny in this city. Like, if you look at any other sport and you're like, oh, those football, like the Steelers, like think about the scrutiny the Steelers get in Pittsburgh, right? Or the Eagles get in Philadelphia, right? Like this is the number one major sport in this city. And for better or for worse, like that's the way it is. Like people live and die by the Canadiens, but that exists in other cities. It exists in other sports. Like that's like, it really is kind of a moot point because up until there's a point where people are harassing the players at their houses, which is not what's happening, right? Like people can get overly critical and boo a bad power play and things like that. And people confuse that with, an excessive amount of harassment. But just think about, you win in Montreal. You never pay for a drink here again. You never pay for dinner again. Like like people do worship you. And that competitive spirit, that wanting to win often should be what drives you. And also that French argument. Listen, these people are rich, okay? And everyone thinks that you were forced to learn, like to go to school in French. No, if you are rich, you can pay for a private school that is not subsidized in any way, and you can get instructed in whatever language you choose. So that argument too, really bothers me. For me, whether or not players will sign in Montreal has absolutely nothing to do with any of these three things. The question is, can I win and who's the coach? Literally. That's it. Scott, I been ranting. I haven't allowed you a word. This is like when you talk about officiating.
My thought with this whole thing is that players aren't signing in Montreal right now because the team just isn't very good. It's
Yeah.
Occam's razor in this situation is that, hey, the Habs are rebuilding. This is
They're
not a
they're
team.
far away from contending.
Yep. That this is not a team that is going to contend this year. That is not quite there yet. And there are players that are, hey, I want to win a cup. I want to be on a contending team. It is rare that you find someone in their prime who's like, I want to be here through a building process that isn't already part of your team. And I think as the Canadiens slowly reach that next level, next year is going to be telling. If they are a team that comes out and looks like they are fully on that upswing, like we saw kind of this year with everyone taking those steps, you're going to see players look at this and go, well, they're on the upswing. I look at some of the other teams in the division here is Tampa. How long is that going to last? Boston. How long is that going to last? Toronto. Who knows how long the core four has left in this group here. Can I get them on the upswing and be a part of something special there? The tax thing, like I said, all this is they are smart. They have accountants for a reason. And at that point, the tax thing is lame enough that they have people to help them take care of their money in this.
Yeah.
And the thing about, it's such a hard market to play in. It's a hard market to play in because this fan base from the oldest generations that are still living have known nothing but success for this. It's a market with expectations, with actual burden behind that. This is not Toronto where the expectation is to win and make money because people expect that because of whatever reason. There's decades of proof to show that you don't have decades of success to lean your hat on anymore. You can point to a decade except for, the last, let's say 25 years, which is not great. But you look at the Canadiens' history, fans expect more out of this team always. And it's what makes this city special. You ask players what city they love playing in. Montreal is a special city to play hockey. I forget who said it in an athletic article that if Montreal is hockey's, mecca of everything, the Bell Center is the Sistine Chapel. It is the center of all of the hockey religion in the world there. It is a special place to play. From fans giving it to opposing players, booing them as a sign of respect. The worst thing that could happen to you as a Montreal Canadiens player or a player on another team is that they do not react to you at all. Being not cared about is worse than being booed in Montreal if you're not important enough to them. And it's not the taxes. It's not the fan base. There are worse fan bases to deal with. Like I said, Toronto exists as a team. I look at Vancouver, whose fans are ruthless in a very funny way, but ruthless about players.
Philadelphia, Boston, are those fans? Those fans are not a piece of cake.
No, and that's the thing is that Montreal is no different. It's just that it is a different enough market because the market is also split into two languages. Right. And maybe if the Nordiques came back, whenever that day may be, we might see a shift in things, and that's an entirely different story.
For me, I think people will dig their heels in further, right? So whoever's going to be a Nordiques fan is going to be a Nordiques fan, and then whoever stays a Montreal fan is just going to get crazier, right? And that's totally fine and totally exciting. But for me, we just need to forget about this argument that players don't want to play here, because if there's a chance at winning a Stanley Cup, if Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton succeed in building something, then I promise you, the biggest prize on the free agent market will want to come here if they think that this is a contending team. And those players, you look at who becomes a UFA and is still worth signing or worth going after, those are players who are in their prime, who have worked hard and built enough of a reputation for themselves for excellence that they get to choose, right? They did the work and this is their opportunity to choose. And yes, it's hard to come by. It's not an easy thing to get these players to sign. A lot of times too, when you look at all these teams, you're like, I don't know which one to sign. None of them really seems like they could be a contender. Then you go, okay, which one is going to make the playoffs? Or maybe which one is in the nicest city? Or maybe which one made the best pitch in terms of what they provide for my family, et cetera, et cetera. But hands down, people join or strive to make the NHL so that they can win the Stanley Cup. That is their goal. When they want to become an elite athlete, they want to win. And if Montreal gives you the opportunity to win, people will say, all right, let me get the best tax lawyer. All right, let's find a school for my kids, whatever it is we got to do. And like, honestly, the Habs will take care of it. You know what I mean? Like they're building a system too, not just for development and stuff like that. They're also building things where to take care of the families, to introduce the wives, to support the wives. And there are companies now that are starting up that help the NHL players and wives do this kind of stuff. Like they will want to come if they have a chance to win. And for me, like just don't like we should not be stressing ourselves out and turning ourselves into like, naysayers and haters and pessimists because we're in a tough market. Like the tough market is the place to play when you win.
Yeah, it's like I said, there's nowhere that deifies anyone better than Montreal when you win.
Right. And just think about the there's a weird beeping noise, Scott.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My neighbor's fire alarm is going off, it sounds like. So I think that's a sign to wrap up the show for us.
Yes, we will wrap up the show right now. And very, very, very quickly, make sure you subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcast before Scott, burns up in a ball of fire. You can find us on Twitter at LO_Canadiens. You can email us at lockedoncanadiens@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you tomorrow.